A hillside 2 hours from the coast is quietly the tallest point on the entire Gulf of Mexico. Sitting on top of a column of salt deeper than Mount Everest is tall. A canal in Cajun country once ran backward for 2 straight days after the ground swallowed a lake whole. A stretch of highway carries you 24 miles with no land in sight in any direction. And somewhere out there, a town that used to be 5 miles wide now fits inside a parking lot. Every fact in the next 20 minutes is real, documented, and on the record with government agencies, universities, and news archives that were there when it happened. Southern Louisiana is not dangerous because of a rumor. It's dangerous because of the actual dirt, water, and rock underneath it. And that's what we're covering, one verified fact at a time. Before we get into it, subscribe, because this channel treats the ground you're standing on like it has a story to tell, and honestly, in this state, it usually does. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because if you're from down here, you already know half of what's coming. And you're going to want to correct me on the other half. Let's start at the harmless end of the list and work our way to the fact that explains everything else on it. Number 18. The Lake Pontchartrain Causeway, connecting Metairie and Mandeville. This is not a bridge so much as a 23.5-mile bet that the lake stays calm. It holds the Guinness World Record for longest continuous bridge over water on the planet, resting on more than 9,000 concrete pilings. And for a stretch in the middle, land disappears completely in every direction. Drivers have reported losing track of time out there. The original span opened in 1956, and a second parallel bridge followed in 1969 because the first one alone couldn't keep up with traffic. It's a marvel of mid-century engineering, built because there was simply no other way to connect two shores separated by 630 square miles of brackish estuary. The lake doesn't care that you're impressed by the bridge. It just asks that you not be out there when the fog rolls in, with no shoulder, no exit, and miles still to go either way. Number 17. Avery Island, Iberia Parish. It looks like a hill, which in flat South Louisiana is already suspicious. That's because it isn't dirt at all. It's the exposed cap of a salt dome rising 163 feet above sea level. The highest point on the entire Gulf Coast, sitting on a plug of rock salt geologists believe runs deeper underground than Everest stands above it. Miners have been pulling salt out of that dome since 1862, making it one of the oldest continuously worked salt mines in North America, with shafts now descending more than 1,000 feet. It's also where Tabasco sauce has been made since 1868, using salt from that very mine. The same coastline erosion draining the rest of the state is eating into the island at a rate of roughly 30 feet a year. Somewhere under Louisiana's hot sauce is a slow-motion geological demolition, and the island's own owners have been publicly warning about it for years. Number 16. New Orleans above-ground cemeteries. For generations, the story was simple. Bury someone in the ground here, and the high water table would eventually push the casket back to the surface during flood season, so the city switched to raised stone tombs instead. The city's first true above-ground cemetery, St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, was established in 1789 after a devastating fire and flood forced the city to rethink burial altogether. Historians now debate how much of the water table explanation is literal fact versus a colorful legend layered on top of French and Spanish burial customs the settlers already carried with them from Europe. Either way, the ground here was wet enough, low enough, and unstable enough that even the dead couldn't reliably be trusted to stay buried the ordinary way, and to this day, unpredictable flooding still occasionally lifts a coffin in the parts of the city that sit lowest. Number 15. The Chandeleur Islands, St. Bernard Parish. This barrier chain used to run nearly 25 miles of protective dune between the open Gulf and the Louisiana mainland, and geologists estimate the arc itself has existed in some form for more than 2,000 years. Hurricane Katrina alone stripped away an estimated 82% of the island's surface area in a single storm, washing out a lighthouse that had stood at Hughes Point for over a century. Federal wildlife officials now estimate the surrounding refuge has lost close to 90% of its acreage since Theodore Roosevelt first protected it in the early 1900s, and the Deepwater Horizon spill hit what was left 5 years after Katrina. The islands exist to absorb the ocean's worst blows, so the mainland doesn't have to. Nobody asked if they'd survive the job. Number 14. The Isles Dernieres, once a single barrier island called Isle Derniere off Terrebonne Parish. It was a popular resort destination before an unnamed hurricane in August 1856 struck directly, splitting the island clean in two and killing roughly 200 people who had gathered there for the season. It was never rebuilt as a resort, and by 1988 surveys showed 78% of its original landmass had gone under the Gulf permanently. Today it's 5 scattered fragments, home mostly to nesting seabirds instead of the vacationers who used to summer there. The Gulf doesn't erase places all at once. Sometimes it just cuts them in half and lets the rest slowly finish the job over the following century and a half. Number 13. Cheniere Caminada, Lafourche Parish. In October 1893, a massive hurricane struck this once thriving fishing and tourism community and killed an estimated 2,000 people in a single night, one of the deadliest natural disasters in American history, and by some counts the deadliest hurricane ever to strike Louisiana. Survivors described the storm surge arriving faster than anyone could outrun it, sweeping entire households out into the marsh. The town never rebuilt. There was no levee system, no radar, no warning beyond the sky itself, and a falling barometer nobody in the community had access to read. Southern Louisiana's coast is dotted with places like this, names that used to be on the map and now only survive in parish records and historical markers. Number 12. Grand Isle, Jefferson Parish, Louisiana's only remaining inhabited barrier island. Since 1877, it's been affected by a tropical storm or hurricane on average almost every 3 years, with a direct strike roughly every 8. Hurricane Ida in 2021 damaged every structure on the island and flattened more than 700 buildings outright, knocking out power for 138 days straight. And every single time residents rebuild, raising new homes 10 feet or higher on stilts to meet the next one. It's the last inhabited barrier island in the state for a reason. Every other one that used to hold a town, from Last Island to Cheniere Caminada, has already lost that fight permanently. Now, if the list has surprised you this much already, hit subscribe, because the entries left are the ones locals argue about the loudest, the ones people from down here message me about the second the video goes up. Number 11. Isle de Jean Charles, Terrebonne Parish. Since tracking began in 1955, this island belonging to the Biloxi Chitimacha Choctaw tribe has lost 98% of its landmass to the Gulf. Of the more than 22,000 acres that once stood here, only a few hundred remain above water, and the single road connecting it to the mainland now floods on a regular basis. In 2016, the federal government awarded the tribe $48 million to resettle to higher ground 40 miles away, making them, by most accounts, the first officially recognized climate migrants funded by the United States government. This isn't a metaphor for disappearing land. It's the actual, mapped, acre-by-acre disappearance of it, tracked by satellite for 70 straight years. Number 10. Lake Panure, Iberia Parish. On November 20th, 1980, a Texaco drilling crew accidentally punched into an active salt mine running underneath what was, at the time, a modest 10-foot deep lake. Within about 3 hours, the entire lake had drained into the mine below, taking a drilling platform, 11 barges, a tugboat, and a chunk of a neighboring island's botanical garden with it, launching compressed air and water 400 feet into the sky in the process. The suction was strong enough to reverse the flow of the Del Cambre Canal, pulling salt water backward off the Gulf and briefly creating a 164-foot waterfall, the tallest ever recorded in the state, for close to 2 days. The lake refilled within days as a 200-foot deep saltwater lake where a shallow freshwater pond used to be. Remarkably, nobody died. 3 dogs weren't so lucky. The geography rearranged itself completely in a single afternoon. Number 9. The Bayou Corn Sinkhole, Assumption Parish. In August 2012, the wall of an underground salt cavern mined by Texas Brine collapsed more than 3,000 feet down, and the ground above it simply opened, preceded by weeks of unexplained tremors and mysterious bubbling in the bayou that residents had been reporting for months. What started as a 2-acre slurry hole grew into a sinkhole covering more than 37 acres and reaching at least 750 feet deep, forcing the evacuation of the entire community, some of whom never moved back. Explosive natural gas released by the collapse seeped into the local aquifer for months, and the sinkhole was still slowly expanding years later. It's still there today, filled with water, technically a lake now, but one built entirely by the earth folding in on itself. Number 8. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill, roughly 40 miles off the Louisiana coast. In April 2010, the rig exploded, killed 11 workers, and spent 87 days leaking an estimated 4.9 million barrels of oil into the Gulf before the well was finally capped in July, the largest marine oil spill in U.S. history, larger than the Exxon Valdez disaster by a wide margin. Barataria Bay's marshes took a direct hit, with oil documented penetrating as deep as 19 meters into the wetland vegetation at some sites, and studies afterward found oiled wetlands eroding at roughly double the rate of unoiled ones nearby. The Gulf that feeds this coast's economy also, on that occasion, poisoned it for years afterward. Number 7. The Mississippi River's saltwater wedge, most recently in 2023. When the river runs low from drought upstream, denser saltwater from the Gulf pushes upstream along the riverbed in a wedge shape, threatening the drinking water for nearly 1 million people around New Orleans. In 2023, it crept within striking distance of the city's main intake before an emergency underwater sill, built and raised by the Army Corps of Engineers. And eventual rainfall pushed it back, and it didn't fully retreat until January of 2024, months longer than officials had originally projected. It's happened before, roughly once a decade, but rarely 2 years running, which is exactly what happened between 2022 and 2023. The same river that built this entire region can, under the wrong conditions, quietly turn its own water against the people living beside it. Number 6. New Orleans is sinking, and not slowly. Satellite radar studies tracking the years before Hurricane Katrina found parts of the city subsiding by as much as 28.6 millimeters a year, more than an inch, with an average closer to 8 millimeters citywide. Some post-Katrina flood walls have been measured sinking even faster than that in the years since. The eastern side of the city was already 3 to 5 meters below sea level when Katrina hit, which is a large part of why it flooded worst and longest. The ground here isn't stable rock. It's compressing river sediment, cut off from the fresh mud that used to replenish it after every flood, settling lower every single year whether a storm comes or not. Number 5. Hurricane Katrina's levee failures, August 2005. More than 50 separate levee and floodwall breaches flooded roughly 80% of New Orleans and 95% of St. Bernard Parish, in some spots under 20 feet of water. At least 986 Louisiana residents died as a direct result of the storm and the flooding that followed, out of a broader regional death toll approaching 1,400. It took 43 days just to pump the city completely dry. The storm itself, a Category 3 by the time it made landfall, was survivable for most of the city. It was the engineered barriers meant to hold the water back, several only 60 to 90% complete when the storm hit, that gave way. Number 4. The Old River Control Structure, near Simmsport. This is the reason the Mississippi River still flows past Baton Rouge and New Orleans at all. By the 1950s, the steeper, shorter Atchafalaya River had captured roughly a third of the Mississippi's flow and was on pace to fully hijack the river's course by 1990, according to Army Corps projections at the time. Congress authorized construction in 1954. And the Corps built a system of gates completed in 1963 to lock the split at 70% down the Mississippi, 30% down the Atchafalaya, permanently, by force. In 1973, during record flooding, the structure nearly failed, vibrating so violently that engineers feared total collapse, and an auxiliary structure had to be added in 1986 just to relieve the pressure. If it ever does fail, New Orleans and Baton Rouge lose their river to a shorter, steeper path to the Gulf. Southern Louisiana's biggest city stays connected to the Mississippi today because of a set of concrete gates most people driving past have never heard of. Number 3. The Atchafalaya Basin, stretching between Baton Rouge and Lafayette. This is the largest river swamp in the United States, sprawling across roughly 1 million acres of cypress tupelo forest, marsh, and backwater lakes, with some estimates pushing the total closer to 1.4 million once you count the surrounding floodplain outside the levees. It holds the largest contiguous block of bottomland hardwood forest left in North America, along with 260,000 acres of coastal cypress, the largest remaining tract of its kind in the country. It's also, quietly, the release valve keeping the Mississippi from doing exactly what Item 4 just described, swallowing the river whole and rerouting it entirely. Beauty and function are the same thing out here. Number 2. New Orleans sits, on average, roughly 6 feet below sea level, with some neighborhoods sitting closer to 9 or 10 feet under. And studies note parts of the metro area have measured as much as 2.5 to 3 meters below in places. It is the only major American city built this way, kept dry entirely through a network of levees, flood walls, more than 100 miles of drainage canals, and dozens of pumping stations working around the clock, every day of the year. There is no version of this city that exists without constant mechanical intervention. Turn the pumps off, and the bowl fills back in. The French Quarter and the highest ground downtown sit on the natural levee the river itself built over centuries of flooding. Everywhere else was drained, engineered, and lowered by human hands afterward. Which brings us to number 1. And it isn't a single place at all, it's the pattern connecting every single item on this list. Louisiana's coast has lost roughly 2,000 square miles of land since the 1930s, an area larger than the entire state of Delaware. For the 25 years between 1985 and 2010, the U.S. Geological survey confirmed the coast was losing land at a rate equal to 1 football field every single hour. On average, not a myth, not an exaggeration, an actual peer-reviewed government finding, verified independently by Tulane researchers. The rate has slowed somewhat since, closer to a football field every hour and a half in more recent surveys between 2010 and 2016. But slower is not the same as stopped, and hurricane years can still erase hundreds of football fields in a single afternoon. Every sinking neighborhood, every vanished island, every salt dome collapse and rerouted river on this list is really the same story told in a different location. Land built by the Mississippi River over thousands of years, then cut off from the sediment that used to replace it by levees built for navigation and flood control, sinking and eroding faster than nature can rebuild it. This isn't a haunted swamp. It's a landscape running a very real, very measurable deficit, 1 acre at a time, and every fact you just heard is a symptom of that same deficit. So tell me, have you actually set foot on any of these, and did I get your hometown story right or completely wrong? Locals always know the detail I missed, and that's genuinely how future videos on this channel get made, so put it in the comments. If this kept you watching this long, you already know what to do. Hit subscribe, because Southern Louisiana isn't running out of stories anytime soon, even as it keeps running out of land.